My dear students, in today's lesson we are going to talk about the critical realism of the early 20th century. So, let's start our lesson. So in this lesson we are going to talk about Victorian age, critical realism in the Chartist literature, the poetry and the drama, critical realism at the turn of ages, naturalism, new romanticism, and criticism. So, let's continue our lesson. Victorian age. Victoria became Queen of Great Britain in 1837, the longest reign in English history until 1901. Great economic, social, and political changes. The English Empire covered a land, industry, and the trade expanded rapidly. Railroads and canals crisscrossed the country, and the science and technology made great advances. The middle class grew enormously. By the 1850s, more and education. So, the government introduced democratic reforms. So, let's continue. Victorian age, factory and the farm. Workers lived in terrible poverty. England as two nations, one rich and one poor. The second half of the 1800s, new scientific theories challenged many religious beliefs. Charles Darwin, the origin of species, traditional values would no longer guide people's lives. Writers dealt with the contrast between the prosperity of the middle and the upper class and the wretched condition of the poor. The late 18th analysis of the loss of faith in traditional values. Critical realism in the Chartist literature. The novel is a leading form of literature. The novel is medium for communication, both intimate and the public, a medium of a personal point of view, models of interaction between authors and the public, giving public ratings, receiving prestigious prizes, giving interviews in the media. Novelist is a public figure. Writers are concerned to meet the tastes of large middle class reading public than to please aristocratic patrons. Long works with numerous characters, actual events of the day. So Charles Dickens confirmed the trend for serial publication. His works are accessible to readers of all classes. The Pickwick Papers is a masterpiece of comedy. David Copperfield is judged to be his autobiographical novel. He gave his public rating in Great Britain and the USA. The theater is an escape from the world. The characters are among the most memorable in English literature. Style of writing. He used his rich imagination, detailed memories of his childhood to enliven his fiction. The technique of writing in monthly, weekly installments to analyze his relationship with his illustrators. Exposure to the opinions of his readers, to witness the public reaction and to alter the story depending on those public reactions. Victorian fiction. William Makepeace Thackeray created a masterpiece in Vanity Fair. The Bronte sisters, Emily, Charlotte, and Annie, created emotionally powerful works, physically tormented characters. Emily's Jane Eyre are ranked among the greatest works of the period. Non-fiction. Writers dealt with the ills of the time. Thomas Carlyle tackled the greed and the hypocrisy in society. John Stuart Mill discussed the relationship between society and the individual on liberty. Leading late Victorian novelists. George Eliot's Marianne Evans novels are held in the highest regard for the combination of intellectual grades, depiction of social and moral problems. Middlemarch. George Meredith's novels are noted for their sophisticated psychological treatment of characters. The Ordeal of Richard Feverel. Leading late Victorian novelist Anthony Trollope's novels are gentle satires of life in rural England, the tale of conflict within the church, the Chester Towers. Thomas Hardy wrote realistic stories in which the characters are defeated by a hostile fate. Jude Obscura is a social and historical development of England and the struggle between classes. It was the early revolutionary and the democratic stage of struggle, preparation for a social revolution. Chartists fought for franchise. So a pessimistic tone, Lord Alfred Tennyson, intellectual and the religious problems of the time. In memoriam, Matthew Arnold, those about modern life, the school Gapsy, and the Robert Browning dramatic monologues a real imaginary character narrates the story, The Ring and the Book. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, love poetry sonnets from the Perseus. Groups of poets, the Yellow Book poets, Algernon Charles Swinburne, and the Oscar Wilde, Arthur Symons. The Rims of Cloves Grove, and the Ernest Ronson, Lionel Johnson, and the William Butler Yeats. Yeats reflected his fascination with Irish folk tales, with symbolism and the supernatural, the wanderings of Odyssey. Drama. So, by 1900, playwrights revived the English theatre, witty comedies and the realistic dramas. Yeats and Lady Gregory helped establish the Irish National Theatre Society in 1901, the Abbey Theatre, world-famous dramas by Saint O. Casey, John Millington, Seeing Years. John Synge was a master of dark comedy. Critical realism at the turn of ages. 1901-1914, novels and the place of social criticism. Later in the period, writing verse in the style of Romanticism. The leading Edwardian novelist Arnold Bennett and the Herbert George Wells. Wells became famous for the War of the Worlds. Critical realism at the turn of age. The literature became intellectualized, more psychological. Novels became more dramatic and tragic, full of bitter satire. And the realists of the 20th century considered realistic description to be the main thing. George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde gained their reputation with witty comedies for the English theatre. The modernist movement, 20th century writers felt alienated from the mainstream, responded by writing more intellectually challenging works or by pushing the boundaries of acceptable content. An aesthetic movement, rejection of Victorian notions of art, its formal features, its relationship to the audience. The emphasis is on the individual experience and the perception, concerned with how the world is experienced rather than what the world is. The modernist movement, stream of consciousness writing, movement away from fixed narrative point of view and omniscient narrator. The trend developed on the basis of democratic naturalism. This trend, which is developed on the basis of democratic ideas, and the writers depicted the life of the working class, and the George Gissing's writing is characterized by the sharp perception of modern reality, interests to people's life. So Ethel Lillian Voynich, Arthur Morrison, and George Moore. So let's continue. Transdisciplinary group, a group of writers and artists which discusses intellectual questions. Virgin Woolf used the technique stream of consciousness to reveal the inner thoughts of her characters. Miss Dalloway. The Georgians, a group of poets, wrote romantic poetry about nature and the pleasures of rural living. Scotch literature. The Killer tradition, elements of fantasy in the folklore. James Matthew and Barrie is an example of mix of modernity and nostalgia. Peter Pan series. A Scotch intellectual tradition is reflected in the Sherlock Holmes books of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Aestheticism. The head of the movement was Oscar Wilde. Writers went into beautiful life from the society where evil and injustice reigned. Used to follow the ideas of realism. So, New Romanticism. The writers contradicted a strong and bright personality to the ideals of bourgeois society. Writers recreated the tradition of adventure literature and the dream of faraway lands, exotic places, and was a contradiction to reality. Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kidnapped Joseph Conrad, Lord Jim, Guilt, Heroism, and Honor. So, I have talked about the modernist movement. Modernist movement is the stream of consciousness writing, movement away from fixed narrative point of view and omniscient narrative. Interest in blurring the boundaries between poetry and the prose. Let's continue. Blurring of the boundaries between the popular art forms, photography, film, and the high art categories. Disorder becomes a major fear, things that aren't national. The modernist movement. 20th century writers felt alienated from mainstream response by writing more intellectually challenging works or by pushing the boundaries of acceptable content. An aesthetic movement, rejection of the Victorian notions of art, its formal features, its relation. The emphasis is one's experience and perception, concerned with how the world is experienced rather than what the world is. So we have talked about the critical realism at the turn of ages, the realists of the 20th century, considered realistic description. George Bernard Shaw and Oscar Wilde gained their reputation with witty comedies for the English theatre. And so, in critical realism at the turn of age, which novels at the place of social criticism, leading the period writing verse in the style of romanticism. The leading it were novelists Arnold Bernard and Herbert George Wells, and they became famous for the War of the Worlds. So thank you very much for attention, guys, and at home you must write down all the texts to your notebook and the answer to the given questions. So in the next lesson we are going to discuss in our lesson, and I will put some questions which is concerning to this lesson. Thank you very much for attention.